he's not on this list.
Yeah.
But we can move on to a guy who I have some fun facts about. He's Treylon Burks out of Arkansas.
Yep.
Massive man. He's 6'3", 225. But the reason why you need to draft Treylon Burks is he hunts hogs with a knife and his dogs. He doesn't use a gun. So if you think this man is scared of NFL DBs, he's absolutely going to tear it up from that perspective. But in all reality, I think that this guy's probably the biggest project in going in the first round right now.
Mm-hmm.
His comps are Deebo Samuel, Laviska Shenault, and Alshon Jeffrey. In my mind, those are like his three potential outcomes. And what got him the hype, and he was a consensus overall one like 3 weeks ago, was that he can break tackles, but you don't want that in a wide receiver like you do a running back. You want a guy who can do things with their hands and catch the ball effectively. And career-wise, all of his targets have come within the 10 yards, except for 18% came past 10 yards. It's just not very exciting for me. He's going to definitely be a project when it comes to his positioning, where he places his feet, and his contested catch radius, in my opinion.
Yeah, 45 of his 66 catches in college came within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. And then the ones that didn't, they weren't really the intermediate, like crossers and stuff over the middle of the field. It was this. He's also really good at the vertical stuff. He can go up and get it, and he can win the deep routes. And then this is him, obviously, on the bubble screen. Like, that's where he's at his best, when they just get him the ball and let him go. Like, you're going to hear people say A.J. Brown with this guy, and like when they see these plays. And that's why. But he's not as complete of a receiver as A.J. Brown. Like, point blank, he can get knocked off his routes pretty easy. He's not a very good route runner right now. They used a lot of pre-snap motion or like plays like that, just little bubble screens, tunnel screens, to basically avoid having him face any press coverage this last year at Arkansas. I think he's probably dynamic enough with the ball in his hands and as a vertical guy that to make teams interested in him, like in the first round. I think he's going to be a first-round pick, but I think there's a lot more that has to go right outside of his control, unless he gets a lot better in other areas, because everyone's going to want him to be the next Deebo Samuel. But like, we didn't have a Deebo Samuel until this year. It's not exactly an easy thing to have a receiver who's also your running back, essentially.
Well, before that, it was Cordell Patterson, who it took him 10 years to get to that in the NFL. Yeah. I mean, maybe like Percy Harvin is another guy you might be able to go back and compare him to even, but it's just, he really needs to land with a coach who can utilize his skills effectively. And we saw what happens when that doesn't happen with Laviska Shenault, where he's being used improperly with his good routes. I mean, Treylon Burks is like the prototypical big slot guy, and that is where he needs to land on a team. And I am always scared when someone compares there's only one Deebo Samuel in the NFL, then says this is the next Deebo Samuel. There's only one in the NFL for a reason. And as we've talked about on this podcast, Deebo also gets a lot of rushes out of the backfield, which I don't think many teams are going to give Burks straight out of the gate.
Yeah. Yeah. Although he definitely like has the size. Did you read off his height and weight, Dalton?
He's 6'3", 225.
Yes.
I will say a lot of the scouts I read says he could probably be a little slimmer. I think they're calling him fat. I don't know for sure.
I think Brett Coleman actually pretty much came out and said he's straight up out of shape at a lot of his pre-draft stuff. So that's also a concern too, that he showed up to, probably the most important workouts of his life so far, not in shape. And he didn't have like it wasn't like a Justin Ross or even like a George Pickens, but more like Ross. Like, it wasn't a situation like that where it's like, oh, this guy has been hurt for the last 3 months and been nursing an injury and is like just barely back to running. Like, no, he hasn't had he didn't have surgery, anything that he's just coming back from. He just wasn't in shape.
Yeah. And my biggest concern with Treylon Burks, and I'll say this now, is that he goes to Green Bay, which you would think would be a great thing for any receiver. But this guy does not run his routes correctly with probably the touchiest quarterback when it comes to his guys running routes correctly, that I would be incredibly concerned as a fantasy owner for that to play out. I mean, it took Devontae Adams like 3 years to get Rodgers' trust, and he's a much more polished route runner. Maybe he wasn't coming into the NFL, but I think that's Treylon Burks' biggest weakness in his game right now. And him going to a team that historically will bury you on the depth chart if you don't have the rapport with their quarterback just worries me a lot.
What worries me with him isn't even necessarily, well, he worries me, but what I'm worried about is what are the two most common destinations you've seen for him in mock drafts? Because the two that I've seen are the Chargers and the Cowboys.
I've seen the Eagles and the Cowboys, and it feels like the Eagles are just getting Jalen Reagor 2.0 with him.
Well, and with the Cowboys, it's like, well, okay, this is a slot guy. What do I want CeeDee Lamb to do? I want him to run from everywhere. I would not like Treylon Burks there, taking up the slot time that I want CeeDee Lamb to get. But it's Jerry Jones. It's Arkansas. It's a first-round pick. That seems like that's at least a decent chance of happening. We're going to do props next week. I wonder what the prop is for Burks just straight up to the Cowboys. That might be on the list. And then with the Chargers, it's like, well, they already have Keenan Allen, like one of the best slot guys in the NFL. They have Mike Williams like on the outside, so it's not like they don't have an outside guy, but
and Josh Palmer.
And Josh Palmer, sure. So there's enough overlap there where it's just like, I don't know. And even like you look further down, like the Chiefs, like, well, the Chiefs have Juju, and Juju is just like a more polished, better version of Burks right now. Burks might have more upside than Juju at this point, but I don't see that fit either. So a fit is going to be a real big, like he's got to go to a team that he can have free reign of the slot, basically. It's kind of like Kadarius Toney last year, where he did not go to a good spot, where it's like he needs to go to a spot where the coach is like innovative and willing to take chances and try new things with play calls and stuff. And that's not what happened with Toney last year. And it was really cool for like 2 games and really bad otherwise.
Yeah. Well, it always worries me when like you ask someone what this guy's best trait is compared to the class, and they say broken tackles. And at wide receiver, I mean, you don't break tackles at wide receiver. You catch the ball when you're open. After the catch, he might break a few, but for the most part, I don't like that being his top trait. I prefer that for a guy who has to take contact like a running back, not a guy who should be open when he catches the ball and run out of bounds.
The last thing on Burks is his trajectory to me has just been so interesting, because if you followed dynasty stuff during the season, people looking at prospects for this draft, like Burks was like the 1.01 or at worst 1.02. And I still feel like he's pretty high on he's more highly thought of by people who are just thinking from a dynasty perspective than real life NFL draft perspective. I'm just very curious to see how that all works out in the end.
Yeah, well, and Burks has the best quote dominator rating of this wide receiver class, and I think people are overweighting that and not looking at how he got those touches and those yards and then expecting it to one-to-one translate. Laviska Shenault was also the best dominator rating in his class, and I still love him, but I've also lost a lot of money on DraftKings to the guys. I mean, it goes both ways.